people today, the idea of educational attainment almost kind of diminishing these things that we need that involve these everyday. You talk about the barbershops, how they're the cornerstones, but nobody wants to be a barbershop anymore. A
Right.
barber anymore.
Yeah. So it's interesting you raise that because I've seen this in your generation quite a bit, having hired a number of people in your generation, that you all are not driven by the same thing that drove previous generations. So, for example, this sense of family loyalty, right? And loyalty to the business. And it doesn't matter how profitable the business is, right? I mean, you talk about barbering, beautician, but I'm seeing people in very, very lucrative businesses, I mean, making a lot of money, who can't get their children to follow in their footsteps, even though they have set the course, they have, plowed the land, the path is easier. These kids could come in and take that business to a whole nother level. I mean, if you make $1 million a year, hey man, if your child came in there now with their energy, with their expertise, they could make $3-4 million a year, right? Mm-hmm. But your generation seems to be saying, you know what? I don't know how important money is. At least some of the younger ones, it's like, I want fulfillment. I want a sense of purpose.
Yeah.
I want to feel good about where I am. I mean, we've had young people, and I've heard stories of young people from employers who said, the employee, they got mad about something and they left for lunch and never came back. Now, that's not necessarily a good practice, okay? I'm not advising that. But when you leave and you don't even come back to get your check,
Yeah.
right? Like you're that frustrated, that money you've already earned, you don't want the check. It's like, wait a minute, hold on, whoa. Where do you think that comes from? Because I'm sure you have conversations with people who, talk about that sense of fulfillment and feeling good about, what you want, and not sacrificing family and not sacrificing your own mental health and well-being and those kinds of things. Where do you see that coming from? Is it just a reaction to what you perceive in the generations that come before you?
I mean, before I answer it, I'm almost curious. Had you heard the term work-life balance before the last, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years? Like that idea of aspiring for that. I mean, that's something that we hang our hat on.
Yeah. So I would say no.
Right.
Like I never heard work-life balance when I was growing up and early on. And for those of you who may be just tuning in, you're listening to Real World, Real Talk on your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz and more, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial and KTSUradio.com. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and I have with me in the studio attorney Brandon Cofield, who just happens to be my son. And, when he talks about work-life balance, I've literally been convicted by this shift to work-life balance and have had to apologize to all three of my children. I think they would agree that they have benefited from the fruit of the labor, but I think they would also tell you that there were times that they would have wanted me to be there that I wasn't there because I didn't have a good work-life balance. It just wasn't even a concept that we even talked about. It was like, hey man, I'm so scared that we're gonna be homeless, and we one check away from being homeless, or in the field that I'm in, a congregation gets mad at you and they vote you out, and it's like, yo, you got to go to work, and you got to, and I've had prior jobs, I had a prior career, so that wasn't a problem. I'm not afraid of work, but I also never wanted to put my family in a position where they would have to unnecessarily struggle or suffer. So work-life balance, that for you all is more of a mantra?
Man, I'd argue, yes, and I think, and if it doesn't get said enough, and obviously in this instance, thank you, I think my generation, we are not far enough removed to be comfortable or complacent, but there is that safety net. My decision to spend time to study for the bar, to go to law school, right? I'm sure you recall that because I was living in the back house that's here, rent-free. But without you having done that, I wouldn't probably be able to do the same things that I've done now, or it would have been more cumbersome to go about that path.
Sure.
And so I think some of that is where that kind of bases itself on. And it's interesting that you kind of mentioned that and kind of segueing into the labor and how different it was turn of the century. And I mean, I'm just looking at an article we were reading about the Memphis sanitation workers, and it was just like that as they were working on their different strikes and kind of building up their momentum. I mean, the majority of the workers were all on welfare. So you're working a 40-hour week, if not longer. I'm assuming a lot longer.
Sure.
In unsafe conditions, and you're still on welfare and public assistance. And so those are the type of things, those fights that a lot of us today, either we feel it, and more recently with these interest rates coming up, and so we're kind of getting a reality check. But I think for a good number of people between the recession of '08, but if we were coming into our own 14, 15 through 2020, it was kind of like, oh, all right, work-life balance. Let me go travel. The world is a lot, I mean, it's a lot different. And the idea that, sure, I mean, you can charge me $15 for a hamburger here, but for $15, I can have enough food for 2, 3, 4 days in another country. All I need to do is get a couple $100, and I can, I mean, it's just the mentality shift is so different because we have so much more of an expansive view, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got to tell y'all, I would laugh. My two sons, Marcus and Brandon, who's here today, man, they were some traveling fools. I mean, they like, if they could get a buddy pass or something, they'd fly like 12 hours to say somewhere one day and then turn around and fly back. And I'm like, but you don't even have time to enjoy it. It's like, nah, it's the experience. Like, I've been there, And so they would just take off. And, Brandon's wife, my daughter-in-law, has that same spirit. It's like, and they deposited it in my grandson. It's like, same spirit. It's like, hey, we got a break. Hey, let's go.
Gotta take off.
Yeah, take off. We're going to take a break. We're going to make it happen. Between writers and actors on strike, contentious contract negotiations that led up to a new labor deal for 340,000 unionized UPS workers and active picket lines across multiple industries, the labor in Labor Day is again at the forefront of the holiday, arguably more than it has been in recent memory. And again, even the people who are working now, this is what's really getting me. The workers are like at a whole different level. I've gone to some restaurants, that you would consider 4-star restaurants, 5-star restaurants. And normally, man, for example, the wait staff in those restaurants is like impeccable, And now it's like just basic stuff. You're like, man, okay, wait a minute, you're not even supposed to be working here. Like, you're supposed to be working at McDonald's. Like, you're not supposed to be working at this fine dining restaurant, right? But again, it's that shortage of labor. Like, people just not coming back. They're not taking what they used to take from bosses. It's like, you're not going to talk to me that way, and it's like, hey, what you going to do,
See, I think...
And listen, and I'm going to say this because this is, I chuckled when I saw this. There's a TikTok video out with a gentleman who is talking to a group of teachers, and, he says to them, shh, he said, I'm going to tell you a secret. We need you, right? He said, and the stuff that teachers, for example, used to get fired for on the spot and things that they would say and do, now principals are like, well, I understand you had a bad day. Right. So that teacher that was like, hey, I got to take off. I need a mental health day. That was unheard of, man. We had teachers and we had principals, and I got some old school educators who are listening who had like 3 or 4 years of sick time. Like, they never took sick time. Mm-hmm. Now, I know people who are school leaders who wake up every morning anticipating teachers taking some days off. They like, we're going to use our sick time. We're going to use our personal leave time. We're going to use our FMLA. We're going to use our time. We're not saving up nothing. I mean, man, when I first got here, I remember we had members of our church, Mr. Donnell and other people like that. Man, they could take 2 or 3 years off and stay on the payroll. Like, they never took off. Mm-hmm. Now it's like, man, you got a generation now that's going to take off. We going to take off. And you know what? Hey, if you short staff, it just is what it is,
I think there's, and again, disclaimer, not an economist. So these are just my thoughts. I think something that's changed, and again, something I'd be curious to for your experience. I think now access to credit and money that may or may not be based off of too much of, your own finances. If you could tell me, I guess, how easy was it to get a credit card, $5,000 limit, $10,000 limit in 1985, 1995? You know what I mean? Today, it's so much easier to get access. I think the idea of money and like the need for money is a little bit convoluted because it's kind of like, somebody somewhere out there will give this to me. And it gets way deep into the weeds as to why the banks are doing what they do. But I wonder how much of that perceived safety net is there and has that impact generally on my generation and people that have always, I was able to get credit cards. I mean, you get a free pizza, here's a credit card. First day of college. I mean, like that culture is a little different. And I'd be curious too how much that has an impact on people's desire to work.
Yeah. So I think for me, my generation, if I can be so bold as to speak for at least my segment of those that think like me, it was about doing better than your parents, and it was about making money so you had safety and security, right? And as a person who has stood in line and got government cheese and government butter and government rice and the like, it was about having enough to, in the words of the Jeffersons, move on up,
Right.
To the east side. What's interesting is, for your generation, I don't see you all setting that as your goal. Like it's almost like you all say, you know what? As long as I've got peace of mind and I can have some experiences, I'm good. Like I don't need all this stuff. Now, the only thing I will say that's unfair is when your generation wants to have experiences, but you want the previous generation to pay for those experiences
Yeah.
after the sacrifices that they've made, right? And they say, oh, mom and dad, you were never there. I mean, you all have never said that to me. I felt that way looking back, but, you see children, adults, young adults saying, well, you were never there. Money's not a matter. I needed you there. And then it's like, hey, can I have some money for, down payment on this car I want to get, or, down payment help on getting my house, or can you help me pay my rent? And it's like, wait a minute, whoa. All those sacrifices that I made provided the resources for you to be able to come and ask me now and treat me like I'm an ATM. And all the parents out there say, amen, you know what I'm talking about, right? So, I think there's a balance. I do think that there is a work-life balance. And like I said, for me, I'm 61. That wasn't anything that was ever communicated to me. It was always, man, you work hard, you put your time in, you do your 20 years, you get your watch, you retire. So even the idea of retiring in your 50s or 60s, that's a relatively new phenomenon. And it's not something that, many of us even thought was possible, let alone plan for it.
See, I think that, and again, after kind of doing some research in preparation for this show, just about Labor Day in general, I think so many people didn't have the opportunity to work. And I think there's a desire to work. So it's almost the inverse today where, there's a workforce shortage. There's more people than ever, but there's a shortage. Whereas then, like, even if there were people willing to work, they wouldn't work. And I thought it was kind of the systems and institutional racism wouldn't allow at least black folks to work. But one of the things that was almost interesting with that UPS strike and kind of the gains that they were working on, I mean, obviously, this UPS strike, man, no AC, that's abhorrent.
Many of the warehouses, no AC.
But see, what I find interesting is that...
and let me just say this. I had a brief stint where I worked for UPS. It was one summer.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I did. I didn't stay there long. I didn't last long.
Yeah.
Because, man, when you working and you emptying those trailers, those 18-wheelers, and one person's emptying them, it's not two, one person. Mm-hmm. And you emptying them, and I'm emptying, man, and I'm, trying to sling this thing down and the roller, rolling the packages off. And I'm getting ready to take a break because I'm like, man, I finished one. And he was like, oh, no, you got to pull up the floorboards. And I was like, pull up the floorboards, and we're like 2 feet deep of more boxes. I did not last long there.
I believe it.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And like I said, no AC, no heat. Man, it's a sauna, man. And man, I just thought I'd throw that in for somebody else. Yeah.
But no, I mean, it was interesting because So the United States Postal Service was one of the first really employers or mass employers of black people back shortly after the Reconstruction era. It's just interesting how, I mean, over the years, I mean, there's so many different advancements and fights. And I mean, I was reading this article, and they were saying today, 1 in 5 black workers are employed in the public sector. And that number was obviously larger in the past. And part of that is because there's anti-discrimination practices that the federal government has to comply with. And part of that comes from the work that some of the titans, A. Philip Randolph, helping to end discrimination in the war industries, pushing for desegregation of the armed forces. And I think we mentioned the last time that executive order that FDR signed to limit discrimination in the federal workforce. And so it's just interesting seeing how much of an impact labor really has on black Americans. I don't think it always gets the full limelight that it deserves on Labor Day. I mean, I love Labor Day, but I'm usually thinking about the Labor Day Classic and cookouts and everything else, and not thinking about, you were talking about that safety and security that generations past had. I mean, I was going to say Nana and or Gladys people. I mean, she was a meter maid post office. Like, there's a
she worked for years as a traffic enforcement officer, or at that time we called them meter maids.
Okay, and see, and that's 1930s, 40s New York. I think everybody probably listening has some connection to the public sector, somebody. And the family of the, I mean, it's just.
Oh, sure. I mean, PP, the same thing. He worked as a crane operator at the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Oh, I guess Dan and PP, that's my great grandmother.
That would be your paternal great grandparents.
Gotcha. Yeah. Just in case people weren't sure who
Dan
and PP were. Everybody has one.
Right.
But yeah, so it is very interesting just to see how much of a benefit, and then kind of that transition. And we have the protections that have not always been the best, and even the USDA has been sued for their ignorant practices with black people and black farmers particularly. But seeing that impact in the public sector and how much work was done leading up through the 60s, and kind of how it ties into the civil rights movement, and then getting into the private sector. And that gets to the Defender article that we were talking about literally just the other day.
And I think what's interesting is that the participants have changed, but the fight is still going on, right? So just a point of history, a handful of cities and states began to adopt laws recognizing Labor Day in the years that followed the initial Labor Day parade that was in New York City in 1883, I believe the date was. President Grover Cleveland signed a congressional act in 1894 establishing the first Monday of September as a legal holiday. And part of the reason for that was because the Pullman Railroad strike that began in May of 1894 effectively shut down rail traffic in much of the country. And many of those strikes were brutally ended, and people literally died. A dozen workers died.
It's like strike busters.
Right, as a result of that strike. And President Grover Cleveland, made Labor Day a national holiday in an attempt to repair the trust of the workers. I know in this city, and some people may not like me saying it, but it's the truth. I know in this city, we have set on millions of dollars that could have been used to help people in our city, because there were people, business executives and developers, who are anti-union and didn't want to pay the Davis-Bacon Act, right? And so, Brandon, I want you to explain what the Davis-Bacon Act is, but the Davis-Bacon basically ensures that when you use federal dollars, right, that union wages are going to be paid. Well, that's going to increase the cost of a project 30, 40%, maybe 50, 60%, because you have to pay union wages. Now, here's what's interesting about that. You're using federal money. And if you're using federal money, why do you have an issue with paying the wages that are tied to using federal money? It's not your money. Like, you not using the money doesn't mean that you're not going to have to pay taxes. You still got to pay your federal taxes, right? And how that federal money is spent, you know, that's the issue that you take up with your congressional leadership and your senators and the president and the like. But we literally would not develop certain things. I mean, I've literally been in meetings with people who work for the city who's like, well, we're not going to do that project, Pastor, because if we do that project and we have to use this money, then, you know, Davis-Bacon kicks in. And I'm going, what is Davis-Bacon? And what's the problem with Davis-Bacon? You know, and so talk about what Davis-Bacon is.
Yeah, I mean, so in short, it's a law, actually, it's been amended numerous times, but from 1931, that requires paying of the local prevailing wages on public works projects for laborers and mechanics. I think it's one of those things where, like you say, it's always interesting when people kind of covet other people's money, especially if they can somehow make them more money.
Right.
People feel different way about different public assistance and all that other jazz. But in this instance, this is really designed to put more money into the hands of not only laborers, but just the general community. And it ultimately taxes, it helps our system flow. So it is interesting and almost pains me to hear that people would rather not pay extra, I guess, in fear of raising the rates for the private sector as well.
Right, setting a new market rate or whatever the case may be. So for example, if you could go and get a day laborer or hire somebody and you pay them $10 an hour to work on this project, but if you're using federal money, Davis-Bacon says for the same job, the prevailing wage should be $30 an hour. Now, you're accessing federal money to do it, y'all. But we don't want to set that market. And it's like, hey, it's literally just a bonus. It is what it is, right? Other things that workers have fought for, and we're seeing some shifts here. I think it's really interesting. 8-hour work days that came about in the late 1800s, to say, hey, we're not going to work. Because when you think about it, it's really a relatively new phenomenon. I say relatively new in that my grandparents would have worked under this system, right? Where you worked, 6 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day. You had to put the work in, and it was labor, and unions that negotiate and say, hey, no, we're not going to do that. Now, that's a phenomenon, though, in this country, because I always find it interesting when I travel that people from other countries, like 4 weeks vacation is kind of standard.
Oh, that might be minimal.
Right, 4 weeks. And they're going to take all 4 weeks at one time. Yeah. Like, I've literally been in resorts, and I'm just glad to be there for a week. And be like, how long you going to be here? Oh, until next month. And you're like, next month? When'd you get here? Oh, we got here last month. You know what I mean? It's like we're going to be here 30 days. We're going to be here 60 days. That's what. It's like, what do you do for a living? And they, have a regular profession, but they're from Canada, they're from France, or, some other country that we would consider a developed country. But they have a whole different perspective of labor. And it's almost like they want laborers to feel good about their jobs, and they want them to be refreshed and, reinvigorated when they come off their, They don't want people coming to work with a bad attitude.
It's definitely a different thing. I mean, so my wife and I, and part of this, like you said, it's kind of, we're used to this rat race in society. I pushed it to the limit. We did our honeymoon probably 2-3 days leading into our 1 year anniversary, and we had the opportunity to be overseas, and we were talking to some people from Dublin and some other cities. And so when I told them, I was like, oh yeah, we finally got to our honeymoon, and we were like, well, we're gonna do honeymoon 1 year anniversary, and they're like, oh, you must be an American. no one else would miss out on two big milestones
Right.
and just try to cram it into one short trip.
Cram it into a long weekend. It's like first anniversary. Oh yeah, honeymoon and this year's vacation. Do it in a long weekend.
Every
Get it all
day.
in. Yeah.
It is very interesting. I think one thing that has changed that is somewhat encouraging, at least in some of these different spaces. And like I said, in that Defender article with the County Commissioner Ellis, they talk about the golden rule, like he who holds the gold makes the rules.
Sure.
And it's interesting seeing how him pushing the disparity study, shining light on these things on the private sector, but dealing with public contracts is something that I'm assuming for years. I mean, if you don't have someone in these positions that can really shine light on these things, then you have these labor fights from the 1800s, 1900s. No, it's just tycoons with a lot of money,
Right.
and then everybody else. And I think now starting to get real, regular, everyday people that care about people in some of these positions, I think is something to be encouraged by moving forward.
Yeah. So an interesting thing that came up in an article that I found says rates of organized labor have been on the decline nationally for decades. More than 35% of private sector workers had a union in 1953 compared with about 6% today. Political leanings in different regions has also played a big role, with blue states tending to have higher unionization rates. Blue states referring to Democratic states as opposed to Republican states. And Hawaii and New York had the highest rates of union membership in 2022, respectively, followed by Washington, California, and Rhode Island, according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Nationwide, the number of both public and private sector workers belonging to unions actually grew by 273,000 last year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics found. But the total workforce increased at an even faster rate, meaning the total percentage of those belonging to unions has fallen slightly. Do you think your generation is a union generation, man? Are y'all or are you all just going to kind of be in it, for yourself and get it while you can and have that work-life balance, and we ain't doing no marching, and like I don't even know if you're going to stay on a job long enough to get vested, if that's the case. I'm just wondering, what do you think?
I was going to say, well, in this instance, I guess having my own firm, I'm hoping I'm there long enough to get vested. But I do think that we kind of exercise our interest and the general well-being and humanity differently. I think unlike in the past where the media, whether it's news, TV, being controlled by a certain small segment, now somebody's shining light, in this instance, Burger King. This is what you do for someone that's been giving you great service for this long.
Yeah.
I'm assuming somebody somewhere caught hold of this and it just took off.
Right.
So I think at least in my understanding, when you're dealing with unions, the most important thing is strength in numbers and shining light on these things. And I think that's something that so many more people can do just from their phone. I think that's one way we go about that process. Generally speaking, at least the way I associate unions, there's specific jobs and that were so much more prevalent in the past that you really truly needed this collective kind of bargaining approach to things.
Yeah.
And some of those jobs just aren't at the forefront today of society, at least what things are people tend to be like aspiring for, which is unfortunate because they are beyond important. And it obviously becomes political as, the left likes unions and caring for people, the right maybe doesn't. That doesn't make sense. It's so much stuff gets caught up in that. I wouldn't say that there's like a blanket way that I would say even the sub culture of just black folks feel about unions. But I do know everyone now is getting really good at, like, you see something, say something, and even if it's on social media, they're going to get after it.
In Hollywood, screenwriters have been on strike for nearly 4 months, surpassing a 100-day work stoppage that ground many productions to a halt in 2007 and 2008. Negotiations are set to resume. Actors joined the picket lines in July as both unions seek better compensation and protections on the use of artificial intelligence, which is a whole nother subject, a whole nother show, right?
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is the disparity for me. And I don't know how you can address that apart from just calling people's greed out. The disparity between the haves and the have-nots that are in industry. So you have an actor who's getting $20 million, for a film, and the screenwriter is making $30,000. Like, he wrote all the lines.
Yeah.
And it's like these people are struggling. Or when you have, for example, things going into syndication. There are a lot of actors, man, who may never work another day in their life because they got so much stuff in syndication, and they're making all kinds of money, right, while they're sleeping. It's mailbox money, man.
Yeah.
This is the stuff that they did one time, and it's coming back over and over again. And I know there was something that the screenwriters were fighting for because they were not receiving what they felt like was just compensation from residual income benefits from things that were in syndication. How do we address that? What are some ideas and thoughts you have? Because at the end of the day, it's going to come down to a legal battle.
Oh, yeah.
What I mean? And the truth of the matter is, even when we talk about unions and striking and negotiating and whether they can strike or can't strike, all of this is comes down to the law in many ways. But it also comes down to just the intentions of people, and are those who have willing to share with and adequately compensate those who do not have?
Yeah, I mean that's a heavy question, Pop. I think greed is nothing new. Obviously, one of the 7 deadly sins. I think that it's something. It's interesting. There's when you look at laws, obviously Civil Rights Act, all these different things, Brown versus Board. All of this it's rhetoric unless you can change the hearts of men and women, right? Like how people actually feel about things. And I mean, there's small changes. You see the billionaire pact, I think that Bill Gates did. Like, hey, we're trying to give away a certain amount, or some other billionaires are like, everything that we have, we want to, give out before we die. I think that there is some changes happening in that instance. I don't know what can ultimately be done, because over the years, you have the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, that resolves these disputes. There's all these systems in place that weren't there before when it was just terrible child labor like practices. All these things. So it's better than it was. It's still awful, and I don't know how to get people out of the idea that some people should have more, should get more, and then once they have more, then they get everything free wherever they go, and then you have other people that are. It's but I want people to be compensated. There's one thing writing a script and then being that person that you can't leave out of your apartment. Or we're talking about Caleb Williams, the Heisman Trophy winner. He's like, he just has a penthouse downtown LA, and it's like, oh, well, why? He's like, I can't go to class. I can't go anywhere. Everything just has to be delivered. Someone has to go down and get it. And so it's there's a pros and cons to it, but there's definitely a certain level, what should be a baseline of humanity, and like what people need to survive and be happy, to be able to care for their kid, be able to look their kid. All the things that really are essential to human life. And I think if we can really figure out how to do that, that has an impact on mental health. That has an impact on just so many societal ills that people want to fight. They want to blame this on crime and this, and this, but it's like, if someone can't eat, you can't really blame them for trying to find a way to eat. There's some of those just elemental, fundamental things that we have to figure out. How to go about doing that, that's going to take a long, long evening and probably a glass or two of bourbon and writing down some great thoughts, because I don't know how you get to the bottom of getting rid of that, one of those 7 deadly sins. That greed that's something.
Yeah. No, it absolutely is. It was a great movie. I think it was a great movie. It wasn't nominated for an Oscar or anything, but called In Time in 2011. And it starred Justin Timberlake and several other really prominent and popular actors and actresses. And it was a movie about time being currency, right? Everybody stopped aging when they turned 25, but you had to work for time. And rich people had millions of years in time. And if they never did anything risky, if they never did anything outlandish, they would never die. You know, you could only be killed or kill yourself. Well, of course, you know, they didn't even allow guns, you know, to be pulled out in the area that was, you know, rich, because they didn't want anybody to be accidentally killed, right? But in the poor section of town, man, people were running because they didn't even have time to walk. They were running around and running from home and running to their job and running to make more time, to work overtime so they could make more time. And it's just a great movie because in our society, and basically here's what they said, you know, people always have to be poor in order to support the people who are rich, right? And the economy was set up as such that if everybody had all the time they wanted, then who would work for time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful simile with money, obviously.
Oh yeah, no, it's a I mean, it's a great assembly, you know, and I think, you know, when we think about money, money's a tool, money is an instrument. But I love what Mike Tyson said. You know, Mike Tyson, former heavyweight champion, said, "If you think money will make you happy, you've never had money."
Yeah.
This is a dude who was a multimillionaire, you know, who would blow millions of dollars, who had the entourages, you know, who had the suites, who had the floors, and who had the security and all that stuff. And he said, man, money doesn't make you happy, you know. And when you mentioned Caleb Williams, former Heisman Trophy winner, right, who is arguably the Heisman favorite this year, quarterback at University of Southern California, you know, he's got this great NIL deal now, man. And like you said, I mean, he's got to live in a penthouse with security, and he can't come out. He can't go to class like he used to be able to go to class, because now, you know, and you don't. I mean, everything from being inundated by fans to being possibly kidnapped and held for ransom. I mean, it's crazy. You know, it's crazy. And so, you know, how do you manage that? And, you know, I know a lot of people who think they want to be famous, you know, and after they get a little taste of fame, are like, nah, I don't think I want that. Y'all can have that. Yeah, I'm not trying to do that. What are some final thoughts you have as we conclude our show on this Labor Day weekend?
Oh, man. I guess this is being new to the broadcast journalism space. I was like, man, I was prepared for us to go a whole different direction. All sorts of historical facts. I think, kind of the same thing it almost always comes down to. I mean, having a love for each other, love for humanity is kind of what should be at the root of everything. And it's also the root of kind of, or the lack thereof, the root of so many ills in society. I think that really on this Labor Day, at least on a historical perspective, take time to think about your family tree. I mean, some of the pleasures that we're afforded to take today are based off of some of the work, maybe, say, A. Philip Randolph desegregating the military. That's how my grandfather, your dad, left out of Alabama. And, you know, I mean, there's just so many things that roll from there, being public service and NYPD. It's just taking that time, I think, is something that so many people need to do and really celebrate the meaning of labor and how hard it was for people to be able to work once upon a time. And we are literally the fruits of so many generations of labor in the flesh today.
Yeah. The late Vernon John said, if you see a good fight, get in it. I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. And I want to encourage those of you who are workers. I love what my son said about work-life balance. that's not something prior generations had. To be honest with you, I don't know if prior generations could afford to have work-life balance. You know, when our foreparents were on plantations, they couldn't afford to have work-life balance. That wasn't even something that they could think about. And sharecropping, they couldn't have work-life balance. And trying to make ends meet and feed families as you migrated up the Mississippi or up the I-95 corridor and came from fields going into urban factories. You couldn't have work-life balance. Now there's a sense where that is, for many, a priority, to balance life, to enjoy life, to recognize that you have one life to live. To go to a place where you feel good about where you work and you feel good about yourself because of what you do, I don't know if there's anything that's better than that. To do what you love and to feel like you never go to work a day in your life. And, you know, there's balance that has to be there. For employees, I hope that you will take responsibility for your own well-being and your own sense of peace and dignity. But for those who are employers, I want to encourage you. Sometimes you can't do it with money, but you can always do it with words. You can always do it with encouraging somebody and adding value to somebody's life. To let them know this Labor Day weekend, this week following Labor Day, that beyond the barbecues and the watermelon and the Labor Day Classic and all of the great things that we celebrate, I want to encourage you to celebrate your employees and let them know that they mean the world to you, because you wouldn't have what you have and you wouldn't have the business that you have without those who are working for you. I'm Dr. DZ Cofield for Real World, Real Talk, signing off. Get ready for Truth with V. Michael McKay, David Goldstein, and a new member of the crew will be coming up right after the 7 o'clock hour. Till next time, God bless is my prayer.
Thank you for listening to Real World, Real Talk. Make plans to join us next Sunday beginning at 6 p.m. Coming up next, Truth with your host, V. Michael McKay, David Goldstein, and Asia Graves on The Choice 90.9 KTSU, your community station.
Thank you for enjoying Real World, Real Talk. This programming would not be possible without you. Become a member or make a donation online at ktsuradio.com or our Member Services Department, 713-313-1909. Coming up next, Truth on The Choice 90.9 KTSU, your